I'm excited.
Stand anywhere you'd like for now. Just not in front of the bridges just set up. Hi. You guys can participate. Okay, thank you everybody for being here and for being on time. This is the Community Planning Lab. We are going to start with a little activity. So planners often work collaboratively. We have to consider feedback and research, and then we have to act. Oftentimes there are time pressures and constraints, like the size of this room. So working with everyone on your team, everyone who is here, I would like you to design your ideal classroom space in this room.
I'll build it.
You have 10 minutes. You can move chairs and tables and anything else you want except for that. Ready, go. Everybody.
Is it closed?
Hello. This is why people just selfishly grab themselves a chair and sit at the back of the
We all need to be able to see that screen.
I get where she's going now. Last year, Dave last year just stood in the middle and started ordering people now. So it's a good way of figuring out who the type A personalities in the room. It doesn't mean that they know.
Well, I was going to say, and what would be really cool,
Please come on in.
what would be really cool if somebody said, oh yeah, and by the way, what you just did, you did it wrong.
So like people are facing that way. Look that way.
But yeah, they got big problems with the health department. We ain't, we're releasing. What's up with the health department? Yeah, kitchen design, roads, all that stuff. So they've had
Oh, wonderful.
so
About 25.
remind me, who was the architect? Three different architects. So that's where the failure.
They've only got a
So I spoke to them,
And then those that need to be closer to
and I said, why, they said, well, we didn't know about this. I said, somebody clearly on your team knew about this because they had this setback identified on the plan. So please refer to sheet what year. And then she finally, she said, well, we actually had three.
Oh, that was my big contact, sorry. Yes, there's a lot of stuff in there.
But I think also because the guy from the state told me, no, as long as they're making that horizontal clearance,
They're good.
it doesn't matter what the vertical is.
Can we have some more chairs?
And what was cool was he copied somebody from Vail, and he
About 3 or 4.
Yeah. 25-ish.
classic planning.
People have seen plans of classrooms.
We have enough chairs. Everyone should find a seat so we can make sure we have enough chairs. I'm sorry, all my stuff is scattered literally everywhere. What's the bed, sir?
And then there's something here that was like a long time.
So you need chairs back there?
We're fine. Thank you.
We need to make sure everyone's included.
Okay. I paused it with 6 minutes and 5 seconds remaining on the clock. We still have a couple people standing. If you're choosing to stand, that's fine. But if you don't have a chair, that would be an issue. You guys, okay? Now, I heard some interesting questions and some interesting conversations. What did you all hear when you were moving
think it should be in a U or a circle, so everyone's included. This is like school.
I agree. Okay, well, there's still 6 minutes left. Do you wanna make some edits?
No.
This way be hard to, if it's at the.
Because this isn't permanent, right? We can change it if we have discussion sessions, right?
Interesting. Okay, so you want to be more malleable?
Flexible planning strategy.
Raise your hand if you want to move the classroom. Kind of take that as a hand, yeah. Anybody else want to move the classroom? Yes.
Do you need to do double duty yet?
I think so.
Just for.
Multitasker.
Like you do.
At your service. I forgot the mic though, so I'm not sure how good this audio is gonna be.
Well, I would say if there was some, give and take on the teacher part. Like if the teacher could meander along the wall and refer to the screen, then it would be easier for us to turn the tables and we would all be like front and center instead of like back of the class.
Interesting, yeah, okay.
But that would require, some input, some working.
I can do that, I can move, yeah.
Have you run classes in here before?
Yes.
Have you seen a more efficient setup based on history?
Interesting question. What would you characterize as more efficient?
That all people in the room feel good with that, are able to see what they need to see, hear what they need to hear?
I can say that the class who did this last semester chose a different setup. I don't know if they were more or less content with it. That's a good question.
Well, this way we have just center here, if you put the desks together, then you would have 2 rows in and out.
Okay, yeah, 2 aisles.
How discussion based is the class?
Good question. Today we're gonna have a few discussions that are whole group, and then several more that are just the person sitting next to you or the couple people sitting around you.
I was a little late, so I kind of missed, I just kind of got in here when the flurry was happening, but what was said before the flurry? Okay, planners recommend, okay, 14 or 15 design to ideal classroom space. Instead of winging it, I think maybe Googling, or asking ChatGPT, what are the ideal classroom? So maybe I gotta find what the intent of, like, what we're trying to accomplish for a day and figuring out the best classroom setup.
Interesting, yeah. Good point. Okay, yeah.
Do we have any school teachers in here? Well, Ethan.
I would prefer you, because then you would see each other and downstairs at the back of anyone else.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good planner expert.
Got 6 minutes. Ready, go.
We're making a U. Come on, kids. We're making a U.
Counting.
Oh, is this part?
I'll go with the flow. Are we going? You got a reading more table? Side and what about here?
Yes, we're,
Or the side. I guess there's a bunch You're good.
Probably the
Go to the bathroom.
center. Yeah, and they, somebody's not going to bathroom. Okay, someone's gonna go to the bathroom, yeah. This person.
That's what I just said, so we're gonna make separate.
Honestly, when you're in the.
Okay, so it was.
Okay, excuse me.
You're gonna get out now, halfway down.
The good news is,
This is the downside of an old iPad. It doesn't hold power very well. Okay, now I have to figure out how with this short rope.
Sorry, I'm going to Shannon over here.
Make this happen.
Yes. We used to have a password machine.
Okay, we still had 3 minutes and 48 seconds on the clock. Read it. All right, what did you notice during this activity, or what does this have to do with planning at all? What do you think?
There are people who participated and people who sat back.
Interesting, okay. What else?
There's always someone, like, I am allowed now,
Okay.
and so I'm gonna get, well, people are gonna hate me that are like, and so I got these flares, and I'll really, and I don't really care how this is set up, I really don't, right? Like, the content is gonna
Not the
be
guest
what
one.
I'm interested in, and not how it's in your head. So really, I don't care if we were like the other way classroom, I don't care, but if people have good ideas, great, let's change it, right? But I'm the loudmouth, so I go, okay, let's go, and then I get a glare, and I'm like, I'm the one that they're gonna hate.
I can't get this.
I think that there were benefits to both setups, and
Yeah.
so depending on what your goal was, you were willing to see. Other benefits either one.
Yes.
I'd say that there are certain truths with whether it's physics or space or planning, like in architecture and engineering, like a triangle is your strongest structure. And so there are certain things that we can kind of quickly get to like the root of what we're trying to solve for. So in space like this, it's like either, a U or this way or that, like there's a limited set of options. So if we understand that, we can kind of, make better use of our time.
Okay, yeah.
We need to work together to solve a problem. This way we're facing each other. So we're interacting with each other in this configuration better than perhaps lined up in rows where it might have been easier for the instructor, because this way you're looking that way, or you could be looking this way, the other way, you're just looking one way.
I think everyone pulled from their own experiences, whether it's what they do daily at work or life experience. Her life, saying, well, my career tells me to do this for this,
Sure.
so I pull from this life experience to be able to add to this situation.
Yeah. People from the back, what did you observe?
Wonderful cooperation between the entire group.
So you're saying
Also-
planning is always collaborative and it always works?
Absolutely. Everyone finally agrees on the solution and there's no appeals. It's done.
I didn't mean for everyone to change because I said that, but I do every year spend a lot of time thinking about how to fit like a certain number of people into certain spaces room.
Yeah.
And whether they should be side by side, pairs, or they should be groups before, and there's pluses and minuses to each.
I think it's wonderful that everything has casters, so that we can try different solutions to the problem in real time.
If only planning was like that. It is a bit more than here.
No.
Okay.
You need to apply to plan this off.
We're gonna be thinking about this a little bit more as we go on this evening, but this is just a way to get started and start thinking about what is planning and what are we doing here. These are the questions that we just answered, so let's get past this. At the start of every class, we'll go over an agenda. And today, that will include going over your syllabus. If you don't have a copy of the syllabus, I'll show you where to find it online. And if you would like a printed copy of the syllabus, you can just let me know and I'll bring it to you next class. We'll also talk about the course overview, and then we'll do some introductions. There will be a history of planning today, including a history of planning in Summit County. Then we're gonna do an activity that involves blocks. the start of every session. The purpose of the learning objectives is so that you can track your own learning over time. So if you feel as though we haven't covered a learning objective, or if you still have questions about a learning objective at the end, please let me know so we can go back over that information. So today, we're understanding different land uses and structures and how they impact the built and natural environment, creating your own definition of planning, understanding the numerous factors and forces that shape cities, communities, and particularly Summit County, and then articulating the importance of planning. So as a brief overview, there is a copy of the syllabus on our website, and I will show you how to navigate there. So the Summit County website, I'm gonna pull up the actual thing on that website. If you went straight to the homepage of the Summit County website, and you're like, no, what do? Okay, you can go to Government, Planning and Zoning, and then on the left-hand side, you'll see Community Planning Lab. That'll bring you to the main homepage, and this is where you all filled out your applications for the class. If you were to look 2 little arrows down, you see this Go to Classroom. So on the classroom page is where you'd be able to find the entire syllabus, which if you click it, it'll open in another screen for you. And you'll also be able to see all of the prep work that you need by week. So before this week, there were the 3 readings that you were asked to do. Can you give me a thumbs up if you're able to find this? Okay, great. So the readings for next week are going to be under week 1, because this is what we're covering, here are the learning objectives we just looked at, and then, hey, assignments for September 18th. And so all of the readings are linked right here. So if you're ever looking for a reading or an assignment, you can just go to the website and click on it. Also, from the syllabus, a lot of the readings are linked. Or for example, this YouTube video for one of our upcoming classes, it's linked in the syllabus as well. Any questions about that? On the syllabus, you will see that there is a class schedule that goes over each week of the semester. We don't have class on which date? Great, we do not have class on October 9th. And our final presentations are when? Great. So on this first page, you'll see that there's a description of everything that's going to happen in the class, including a description of something that's going to be a meeting observation, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and your final project. So as you go through, this is all the material that we're going to be covering, all of your readings, all the assignments. Then you get to the end of the syllabus, and here is a brief description of the final projects. Do you have to do a project? No. Can you do a project in a group? Yes. Would it be great if everybody did a project? Absolutely. But you're also not being graded, much to my chagrin. So here are the basic steps of outlining your final project. There are also 2 links with further information. One of the things you're going to be asked to do at the end of class today is spend some time looking through the syllabus, looking through the final project, seeing if you have any questions. So that's where this information can be found. It's also on the website for the Community Planning Lab under Final Project. And then the last assignment is going to be meeting observations. We have a lot of committees and groups in Summit County. A lot of them. And we're going to ask that you go virtually or in person to 4 meetings over the course of the semester. We have the Eastern Summit County Planning Commission. They meet every 2 weeks. Snyder Basin Planning Commission, they also meet about every 2 weeks. Pat's going to talk a little bit more about this later on. The County Council, they meet every Wednesday, almost every Wednesday. And then you're going to pick a special recreation or a special service district meeting to attend. After you attend each of the meetings, there are just some notes for you to take, and then 3 questions to compare and contrast the meetings that you observed. about whether or not we're gonna have class, I will send out an update via email. If there is horrendous weather and it's not safe for people to be driving, we'll just switch to Zoom. So please check your email the day of class so you know whether or not we're meeting in person. Sound good? Okay. So, introductions. This is what we're going to do. In 90 seconds or less, you're going to answer these questions. I'll give you a moment to prepare. So please tell us your name, where you live, what brought you to the community planning lab, and if you have time in your 90 seconds, what song would play every time you walk into a room, or if you could be any animal, what would you be? Here's an example. Hello, my name is Maddie McDonough. You can call me Maddie. I live in Mill Creek, which is far from here. What brings me to the community planning lab is that I love planning and I love education. So this is a big passion of mine. I used to be a middle school and high school teacher for many years, and I apologize if I do something weird like clap at you. If there was a song that could play every time I walked into a room, it would probably be Hallelujah, just because that would be really amusing. The end. Okay, go ahead and take a moment to plan your introductions if you'd like to jot things down. Then we'll get started. And I'm going to take roll on my roll sheet while you talk. Okay, who's ready? Otherwise, we're going to make somebody in the back go. Ready?
All right.
Oh, she's standing. So excited.
Well, you're here. I'm Elaine Murray. I live in Park City. I've been in Park City since 2002. I've seen a lot of growth. When I got here, it was old boarded Kmart with TJ Maxx's today. So I've seen a lot of growth. And I have lots of tentacles in different property, in different states, and the planning department, the planning process in all these different places is so interesting. And, you know, like even looking at Heber and seeing their history and then applying it somewhere else is just interesting to me. And then, I am woman, hear me roar. Too big go.
Nice, thank you. We can go in order if that makes you more comfortable. You wanna go?
Jan Perkins, I live in Oakley. I joined this class because I need to further my education on planning to address my severe concern about what Oakley has in the works for their city center. And also, I'm passionately interested in preserving the Camas Valley Meadow to protect the aquifer and everyone downstream. My animal is a sea turtle, and my song is Put Your Lights On, Santana.
Nice, thank you. Edward.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I actually live in Cottonwood Heights, so also far away from here. But I'm here because I work for the county. I work in the communications department. And sometimes my superpower is not fully knowing things, and if I'm able to understand it and communicate to people, then that means we're doing a good job. But also on the flip side, it would be nice to be more educated on some of the departments I work with, like the planning department, so that I can best communicate things to the public. And my animal is also a sea turtle, because you can live for a really long time and explore the ocean, and for the most part, it's like you.
Nice.
Hello, my name is, Kim Marshall. I live in Camas. I'm from Utah, was gone for a very long time due to my career, came back. Lived in Salt Lake again for several years and then moved to Camas 2 years ago. And what brought me here is, since living in Camas, I've been really disappointed in the level of sort of hostility that the citizenry has towards the county. And there's a huge amount of skepticism and distrust around planning and what's going on. And that's been kind of sad for me to see, because change is coming, whether people like it or not. So I think there could be some improvements in communications and processes and education in general around what's going
folks in the back, you have to speak as well, so.
Sure. My name is Amir Chaush. I'm one of the planners in the planning department. Besides making me do this, Maddie, I'm here to learn from you as well. So I'm excited to see how you learn and how we learn from you. I live in Jeremy Ranch in Snider Basin. My song, every time I would like there to be birds chirping and harps playing when I open a door and walk into a room. And if I could be any animal, a mythical animal, I'd be a griffin.
Nice.
Just changing the rules.
All right. I'm Susan Kutcher. I'm on the board of adjustment, so we've connected before. I'm from Philadelphia, which is highly planned city. If you are unaware of this, Philadelphia was one of the most successful colonial towns because it was planned so well by William Penn, blah, 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 blah. And Kevin Bacon's father, Edmund Bacon, there was a relation, it's not his father, I don't think, but was the big planner from the 50s and the 60s, and made Independence Hall the first historic national park. So we're a urban center that had trains going in every direction as the sun burst out. So commuter systems and walking are part of being a Philadelphian. We're coming to Utah, I guess starting in 2005. You have to live in your car, and it's, that was very unusual unless you're in the suburbs. In the suburbs, the town I lived in was 15 minutes away from town, but there was only 2 traffic lights, 65,000 people, and one street was commercial and one street was apartments, and nothing for 15 minutes driving was commercial. So I know what the suburbs are like. I thought I was moving to Iowa when I moved to the suburbs to raise my kids. But anyway, so I'm interested in urban planning. I'm interested in public transit as well as avoiding ugly sprawls. And my song, I don't know what it would.
Philadelphia Freedom.
Probably Fly Eagles Fly, that would be better. But, and any pet owner like myself, I would like to be that little dog that's well taken care of.
Thank you.
My name is Sharon Where we moved here 7 years ago from the main line, not from there, but moved from there, where I very much was married to my car, still am, unfortunately. I'm a natural resource manager by training, so I've done a lot in communities, but mostly in the marine environment. So I'm here to learn more. I'm wrapping up the Park City leadership class where we've just scratched the surface on all of this, and looking forward to doing a deeper dive, and I would be an octopus. Thank you.
Leslie Masters, Highland Estates, and what brought me here was my Nissan truck, and I bring that up because Highland Estates has been in the news. I had 3 closed roads, we had a gas leak, so actually my truck came in handy to do a little 4-wheeling to get out of my neighborhood because the whole thing was shut down tonight from all of our construction. But I've been going to a lot of planning meetings for a long time, trying to get my apathetic neighbors involved. But trying to, it's a balance. If development is coming, balancing everything that's happening and trying to get more information. I talked to a lot of folks in Highland Estates when the roads were open. Honest to goodness, you hear roads.
Over the worker levels.
No, but the sidewalks and a couple other. Yeah, so I've just been involved, attending a lot of meetings over the years and want to get more knowledge in it. And the song, Live Like You're Dying, because time is fleeting. Or Turdy Wyoming.
what brought me to the lab here was, I wanted to, obviously there's a lot of issues going on at once in this small county. And to better understand what's going on and what you read in the paper or hearing bits and pieces, I'd like to have a little more comprehensive view on that. My previous life in college, I was a geography major and major in urban and environmental geography. And that was a long time ago, and I didn't stay with that field, but I'm still kind of curious where it's at right now, so.
Yeah.
And my animal would be a raven.
Nice. Thank you.
I'm Sandy Margulies. I was born and raised in Park City. I recently moved back home, which has been nice. I'm interested in this because I'd like to get involved with government someday in law school. I took a lot of real property and ordinance and various classes and whatnot, even though I don't practice that now. I'm a prosecutor for the state. I've actually just gotten home from a deployment, so just ignore me if I start acting weird once in a while. But it's good to be home. If I could be one thing, I'd actually be a plant. I'd be a quaking aspen.
Nice. Thank you.
My name's Bill Sirocco. I live in Park City. What brought me to the community lab? Well, there's a few things. I've got a deep passion and interest in planning and design. And I spent a lot of time attending planning commission meetings, both in the city and at the county level. Zoom for Eastern Summit County Planning Commissions because I prefer not to drive. I'm also a candidate for the Park City Council this year, and one of my big goals is to really up the collaboration between the city and the county, so this is part of that learning process. What song? The song I would choose would be Where the Streets Have No Name, because I'd like the streets that have less of a priority in our lives, meaning less cars.
Meaningful. Okay.
Yeah, and if I could be any animal, it would be one of my 2 Labrador retrievers, because they really lucked out when we took them home.
Nice. Thanks.
Katie Canarella, and I'm in Camas, and I am very interested. I love the Camas Valley, much like you stated. We have a lot of sprawl issues going on in the valley, and you know, I think our resources are being pretty zapped by some of these mega developments, and the affordable housing issue. I mean, on and on and on. There's so many issues that we're facing that you know, I just want to try to understand a little better, try to have my voice heard on preservation. My song would be Zippity Doodah, and I think I'd like to be an elephant.
Nice. Nice.
I'm Bobby Whitehead, and I live in Marion, and what brought me to the planning lab is I initially moved to Summit County in 1985, and I moved away and came back almost 12 years ago. And there was a huge amount of growth, and so part of it with me is learning the history of what's behind all of that, the legalities of it, property rights, what goes into the actual approvals, and that sort of a thing. And I also, same opinion of this with Camas Valley, with all the development going on and such. I think I would want to be hot, so I have a bird's eye view of what's going on.
Nice.
My name's Esteban Nunez. I live in Old Town, Park City. For the past 4.5 years, moved to Park City in 2016. I wanted to be part of this just because, well, I do have a background in real estate. I have a master's in real estate development and urban planning, but that was kind of like, that program was more geared towards working for developers. And so this, I felt like would be geared towards, you know, from the government side of things and how things are put together and planned. You know, it seems like there's a disconnect a lot of times between developers and the community. And you know, I'm actually kind of pro-development just because we have the opportunity to live in such a beautiful place. I think that more people could benefit from living in a beautiful place. And we obviously see how blessed we are to live here. And so I'm very much pro-development because I think it can be attainable for everyone who wants to be here, within reason and preserve
understanding that part of the planning process, that includes all community members, which to me means people with disabilities, visible or invisible. I think that's a really important part as the one demographic that we can all join. And so I wanted to understand how I can make a positive impact there. My song, probably We Are Family, would probably be what it is. And animal, I'm between like a magical unicorn and a honey badger, because I'm not good enough at making it happen. So.
I'd like to see that hybrid.
I adapt, obviously, that's what I like, so.
I'll go. My name's Martina Nelson. I live in Silver Creek Estates, AKA Redneck Acres. And I feel I do my part, junk in my backyard. I'm a land surveyor, and so I tend to kind of see a periscope view of my clients' land and projects. I do look outward, I make sure if there's zoning different next door, we talk about that. But I'm here to hopefully get more of a big holistic picture. So I was really excited when I think I read about this in the Park Record or KPCW or both, and so that's how I found out about this. So thank you for having this class. Song, I don't know. James Taylor, You Got a Friend. And then animal, I would be a kestrel hawk, and they are the smallest of the falcons. They are fierce predators, so they're not like big grizzly bear type of, top predator, but kestrel hawks are really cool. They're around here. You'll see them, they're about this tall.
They're fast.
They're fast. Yeah, I'm not, but they're fast. I could be one of them, that'd be great.
My name is Hank Lewis. I live in Quarry Mountain, off Old Grass Road. I've been here in town since my car broke down here. In 1975.
Volkswagen bus.
Yeah, there are about 800 people in town then, so it has grown quite a bit. I'm an architect, so I'm interested in problem solving, and have been for a long time, and design, and I've known Todd for quite a while. He and I both taught down at the U at the same time. I'm here, I thought it was interesting that, I thought too, saying what brought me here was my Rivian truck, and I'm interested in that aspect of transportation. The traffic around here has increased considerably since 1975, so that's important to me to try and learn what I can through this lab. And, and since I've had to retire from skiing because my entire lumbar spine is fused together, I've been trying to go on a scuba diving trip 1 week every month. And not too long ago, I was in the Blue Hole in the Bahamas, and one-on-one with a beautiful hawksbill leatherback turtle. So sea turtle is a big feature here.
Yeah.
We got 3 sea turtles. And of any songs that I would have to choose, I think I'd choose Mr. Tambourine.
I'll go next. My name is Joan Meixner. I live in Pine Brook in the Centerville Basin. Moved here in 2017, so my husband can ski more. I'm interested in the community planning lab. I've been working in commercial real estate for over 30 years, and in New York City, which has its own particular set of wonderful issues. But I see lots of problems, and I see lots of different people who have to solve them. So I'd like to learn more about who those people are, and how, not necessarily how I can influence them, but how to understand all the different layers, because at the end of the day, the legislature seems to be able to veto anything, so it's good to understand how things work. A song, it's so hard, I'm so bad at names, but the Queen song, Don't Stop Me Now, that's always good for me when I get going. Can't stop me, you won't probably want to. And if it could be an animal, I would love to be a beaver, because I think, as I've learned a lot about them over the last few years, just the ability to influence your environment and just influence everything else around you in a positive way, so.
Very nice.
I've got a quick confession to make. Since the seal's been broken, I too moved here from New York City.
New York City. We all live in New York City. I went to Boston.
Hello, I'm from Salt Lake County, so I'm Party Crasher, so thanks for letting me come. I live in Harriman for the last 15 years, so I've seen a lot of growth
Not so close
happen.
to here.
What's that?
Not so close to here.
Not so close, no, but I'm a budget and policy analyst for this state. And, but I'm on a planning team, so I've been trying to learn more about planning. And seeing planning from like a statewide perspective, it's really interesting. I want to learn more about local planning too.
What's your name, Jared?
What?
What's your name?
Terry Anderson. Oh, and I'd love to meet you.
Nice.
Did a good meeting.
Okay, I'm Jeff Young. I live in Oakley. We've been in Oakley for the last few years. Before that, I was in Salt Lake for 20 years and grew up in Detroit. Much different than Detroit. One of the things that brought me here was kind of getting involved in the community a little bit more, and I thought this would be a good overview for kind of see where I fit in a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna get home. Watch it fly around.
Hola, my name is Amy. I live in Oakley, but I do not know my Oakley neighbors until now. I came here because I never in a million years thought I would live in rural Utah, and I never even thought I would be happy in rural Utah. And I just love living in Oakley, and I know right now a lot of changes coming and we're apprehensive about it, so I wanted to learn more about the process and how things get stuff like that.
Yeah.
I want the Zephyr song by the Record.
Awesome. My name is Zulema. I live in Park City, moved there 10 years ago. I'm here just to learn a bit more of what's going on in the community. Winds of Change, I love that song, and I would be in Animal, I would like to be both.
Nice. Thank you.
I'm Tricia Eisman. I live in Camas Valley. I've been in Utah since 1986. I was referred to this class, and I go to a lot of city meetings, so I thought this would be a great way to learn how to listen to both sides and find solutions. I think that's where we need to be at this point. We can't stop what's happening, but we can find solutions. I have no idea on a song, but I'd be a pampered cat.
Nice. Okay, let's see, we have a Jamie.
Jamie's not here.
Okay, Brendan. Or Sarah Jo. Okay, I think that was everybody. Jen, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Leslie. Just moved to Oakley a few months ago, but I've been bouncing around Utah since 2014. I am here because I'm a new employee in the planning department at the county, and I'm still in the sponge stage, so I thought this would be a good opportunity. If I was an animal, I guess I'd be a frog for water and land.
Nice. Do you want to talk for you?
Evening, everyone. My name is Peter Barnes. I'm the planning director, and some other words, for Summit County. I do what Maddie tells me to, like we all will by the time this course is over. I'm not from these parts. I'm from the UK. I'm an architect and urban designer by trade, prior practice, occupation. Lived in the UK, lived in Europe, practiced in the Middle East, practiced in the Caribbean before I came to Summit County. I was actually living on an island in the Caribbean and swore I would never live far from the ocean. A friend of mine called and said, why don't you come to Utah and do some skiing? So I flew over and said, so why is it so cold and where's the water? And I've been trying to save up enough money ever since to go back to the Caribbean, but that's not going to happen because I've actually lived in Summit County longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life. I think that Planning Lab is a fascinating way for us to get direct feedback that isn't people calling and yelling at us. Thank Maddie for organising it and putting on with Jen's help Animal-wise, I was gonna go with Loch Ness Monster, but I like the idea of a sponge, maybe we'd do that. And a number of years ago, in a fit of depression, we were talking about what would we play at our wake, and I was thinking Closing Time by Leonard Cohen.
Nice. Thank you.
I'm Patrick Putt, I'm the Community Development Director for Summit County. Almost 11 years later, I'm still just absolutely giddy because I was able to convince Peter to come and work with me. Having spent many years across the counter in Park City Municipal Corporation, debating all the things that we're gonna be talking about, you know, from now till the holidays. Kind of blessed to have the colleagues I have to work with, but that's, I guess, aside. Where do I live? I fear tonight it's going to be in a tough shed with 2 Australian cattle dogs, which I left with my wife. They're very bonded to me, and so they always have these family disputes. So it may be a tough shed in the Trailside neighborhood. What brought me to the Community Planning Lab? God, difficult question. If I said Invasion of the Body Snatchers, would that make any sense to anybody? Anybody remember that movie? 1966, I think it was Warner Wagner was the director. Premise of the movie is the world is taken over by humanoids, and they're cultured inside these pods to look just like human beings, and when they come, you know, at the end of the story, they take over the world. What's the relevance to that? I see an opportunity here for 21 people to be pods in their own neighborhoods, in their own communities. Why? Because we're gonna help give you some background. Hopefully, we're going to form you with some really important information. We're gonna encourage you. We're gonna give you a vocabulary and an understanding of a process, and we're gonna wrap you up in these nice pods. And after January, hopefully, you're gonna be in your communities. You're gonna be in Pine Brook, you're gonna be in Camas, you're gonna be in Marion, you're gonna be in Park City. And the right environment's gonna culture you to open up, and when you do, you're gonna have all the tools necessary to kind of change your neighborhoods for the better. Places worth caring about, not just places worth, you know, living in for a while or making money, but making the real changes to your communities. That's why I'm here. If a song, so I'm a hybrid of a Polish and Scottish culture, so anything that would have an accordion would work for me. It could be a hymnal or something from a Danish thrasher music, as long as it had an accordion, that would work for me. And what kind of animal would I be? If I was really truthful, I'd say a weasel, but that would come off as being deceptive. So I'm gonna do my alternate, and that would be a badger. Why? They're short, they're thick, they're gray and they're hairy. They're social creatures, and they really are about their family. So I would be a badger if I could be.
He's had that question before, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah, it's one of my go-tos. Thinking about what kind of animal you would be, I would be a weasel, because they can sneak into places. They're quick and they're sneaky. And I feel like as someone who's relatively tall, I'm often not quick or sneaky. So it's, you know, my alternate ego here. Okay, well, thank you so much for introducing yourself. As we go through the course, you'll have a chance to speak to people sitting around you, and I hope every class you'll choose to sit next to somebody new so you can continue to meet new people and connect in this community.
What was very interesting, I felt was very interesting is how many people are transplants within the last 15 years. As opposed to old timers. And it's FYI, tomorrow night there's a meeting on density for affordable housing that they want to put at the bottom of Pine Brook on a 1 acre lot. They were trying to put on 22 affordable townhouses. It was obviously not very much room. That might be a meeting that you all want to go to.
It would definitely be an interesting meeting to attend. Quick note is that during this class, we can't discuss current or ongoing projects in specifics, because we're not in part of the closed, or the public meeting format, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so a brief history of planning. First, a note. During this course, we're going to be thinking about planning in the big sense of the word, so like planning the profession, planning the idea, planning the concept, but then we'll also be thinking about planning specifically in Summit County. The reason it's important to think about planning as this big idea is that it's part of that history that several of you mentioned, right? If you understand the history, you have a better chance of understanding how we got to where we are today. So when we think about planning in general, it can be sort of this big, daunting topic. But I want you to take a moment. We're going to use our journals. If you haven't opened it up so far this evening, it'll be your first time using it. And the purpose of doing this, the purpose of having these journals is a way to keep track of your thoughts and what you've learned over the course of time. So in your journal, I'd like you to take a moment to jot down, what do you currently know or think you know about planning in general? So not specific to Summit County, not specific to your home community. What do you know about planning in general? And also jot down, what do you want to know about planning in general? Take a couple minutes to jot that down. If you finished early, you can draw a picture of your animal that you want to be. Take about 30 seconds to finish up your idea. You can have a journal if you want.
Really?
Yeah.
But I already know everything.
That's not fair.
You need multiple journals to worry about that.
Okay. Let's start to think about some of these things that you might be curious about, some of these things that you might want to know. Give me a thumbs up if you did the reading. We had 3 different reading assignments, one of which was about the overview of urbanization in the United States. That gave us a bit of a timeline of planning. We also had an introduction to one of our planning textbooks that we'll have several readings from throughout the semester that talked about what is planning in general. Here's a little bit more history. In this class, we'll talk a lot about the history of planning or planning in the United States, but this is not something that is peculiar to the Western world. Planning has been around for many, many years, and in Peter's later presentation. He'll give you the history of the world in 45 minutes, and we'll see how planning has been around forever. But a lot of the examples that I'm about to give are US specific. So looking back at pre-modern planning. So pre-modern planning can be dated back to the 1600s in Philadelphia with their gridded streets, and they had neighborhood parks that were put into place as a part of the planning process. Planning as a profession, however, can be dated back to around the 1900s with things like the New York State Tenement House Act. This is one of the first times that there were directives put in place to make changes that would impact people's lives. So the old law in 1879 said that the air shaft, you didn't have to have very much space between buildings. The units could be pretty dark and poorly ventilated. But then they decided that's a bad idea. So there was a new law put in place, the tenement law, that mandated these larger courtyards for increased natural light and circulation. This necessitated things like the profession of planners. One thing that you're going to hear again and again in this class is that land use, which is how and where we use land, is inextricably connected to transportation. So transportation options and land use choices are linked. If you look at the nuggets of wisdom on the board, one of the things you'll see up there is transportation and land uses are linked. So if we think back to the original 3 forms of transportation, we had walking, being pulled by a beast of burden, in this case a horse, or harnessing the power of the wind. Those are pretty much our options to begin with. Those are the initial forms of transportation. Now, if we think about having just these forms of transportation, what do you think city or community environments looked like?
Well, they were based around ports.
Okay, based around ports, what else?
Clustered, water.
Why clustered?
If, unless you were rich enough to own a horse, you couldn't go anywhere. You had to build a walk to the port, to the plot of land through the farm.
Okay. Do you think that the land pattern as we see in much of Summit County would have been possible with these forms of transportation? Perhaps not. Okay. So until the 1800s, we were pretty much stuck with these forms of transportation. And then at the end of the 1700s, we get this idea of the steam engine. So the steam engine was developed in England and then imported to the US. This eventually led to the first railroad line that was in Maryland. And around this time, there were lots and lots of people making their way across the country to California, and some people even stopped in Utah and decided to stay here. I'm sorry?
Transcontinental Railroad.
Yeah. In 1862, Congress adopted the Pacific Railroad Act, which was really the first nationwide transportation planning effort. This effort recognized the importance of having transportation and how that related to the nation's economy. So this showed us that not only was it possible to have this really large-scale transportation planning effort, it was also possible to get private industry involved in building infrastructure. Because to industry, the access was the big thing. Access is always the answer. Transportation is not just about transportation. It's about being able to access resources, access places. In 1869, we had the Golden Spike moment here in Promontory, Utah. This is where the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroads met. And this reminds us that Utah has always had a really important role in the history of sort of transportation and transportation planning. The black and white photo was from this sort of original Golden Spike moment, but it doesn't accurately represent the people who actually built the railroads. construction of the railroad, and so during a more recent reenactment, that's the picture in color, they were attempting to show a more accurate representation of those who were involved in the process. This is really interesting. Part of the railroad company's deal with saying, yes, we will be involved in building this huge transportation option for all of these people, but part of our payment has to be land. So this is a map that shows the land that was given to the railroad companies as a part of the agreement for them to build the railroads. So huge swaths of land in California, were given to the railroad companies, and this map shows all the land that was given throughout the US. So again, big deal for access. Here in the 20th, by the end of the 20th century, we had 240,000 miles of rail lines across the country, and that shows a very interconnected eastern side and then lines going out to the west. So you may be thinking, okay, great, that's the railroad. What about other forms of transportation? Well, the bicycle. So who invented the bicycle and when is sort of a contested fact in history. Here is an example of an early prototype of a bike called the Dandy Horse in 1820. And by 1868, we had something that looks more like the modern day bicycle.
Invented by a Scotsman, by the way.
According to someone who's Scottish. And other types of transportation were being developed at roughly the same time. We had the streetcars in 1830s, the first horse-drawn carriage in the 1830s, and then the first electric streetcars in Cleveland in the 1880s. And then we'll come back to this at another time, the American streetcar scandal that led to essentially the decimation of the streetcars in the US. And then because of that, we were all dependent on the car. So the car was being developed at roughly the same time. Developments in technology were being made in the late 1800s. They started in Europe, as many things do, and then came to the US in the early 1900s. The industry really flourished with these big automakers like Cadillac and Ford and General Motors and Chrysler. There was a huge change in car registration numbers between the year 1900 and 1995, going from around 8,000 to 128 million in 1995. Any guesses as to how many cars are registered in 2023? Pretty close, 228 million. So as we've said, transportation provides access, and it's all about being able to get to places, to do things, or to buy things, whatever it is. So before 1825, as we mentioned, the available technologies of walking, being pulled by an animal, or being moved by the wind created this pretty compact urban environment. The area was pretty small because you had to be able to access it by foot. So we can still see traces of this. Some of our older cities in the US, you can still see these fairly compact urban environments. You can even see it in bits of downtown Salt Lake, the gridded streets, being able to walk to certain places. But after this, after the pedestrian city, when we moved into this railroad model, which was mentioned already, the shape of the city really changed. We still had a compact urban environment, but then all of the spokes that would be connected by the rail lines, people got to spread out a little bit. But you'll notice that these areas that are sort of the petals on this flower are indicating that the beginning and ending parts of the trip were still dependent on foot. So you're still walking in the beginning to get to the train, then you might go to another neighborhood, get off the train, and then walk someplace else to complete your journey. So it led to this sort of spoked city model. Between 1900 and 1925, this is what we would categorize as the golden era of transportation, because we had so many options. We had walking, we had biking, we had the streetcars, and then when the big auto companies came in, we had the option to drive. And so this era, this golden era of transportation, it is when people had the choice of different transportation options depending on what made the most sense to them. But then after this, starting in 1945, we started building cities that had all the other options removed. And so the only option was the car. Now, if you're looking at the graphic here, what did the introduction of the car do for the city environment? Either positive or negative. What did it do?
Created congestion.
Could have created congestion.
Could have expanded.
Okay, it's expanded the city. We're no longer stuck on just the spoke lines. We can get to a lot more places. What else?
We'll go further where you wanted to go.
You can go even further out. Okay, so this is an example. Thank you. This is an example of how the transportation system may have developed. You can just put it down. Yeah, it's okay. So this is the city of Chicago, if you're familiar. Now, what we're seeing, my little thing doesn't work for me. What we're seeing here is the original downtown city of Chicago, and then the trains that are kind of spoking out, very similar to this illustration that we saw previously. On this screen, you can see a development map, roughly by quarter century, of the development of Chicago. So we started with this very, very dense urban core in 1850. Then by 1875, it just went out to incorporate this area. Then by 1900, it went out to incorporate this area, and so forth. And so what you see is Chicago didn't develop in concentric circles, right? You didn't just go out with the exact same number of people at every band of the circle. We're following that same train line pattern. So before the introduction of the car in Chicago, these areas, each of these circles represents a sort of community center. Each of these areas was connected to downtown Chicago by the train, but all of these areas in between were largely inaccessible until the car was brought over. And then with the introduction of the car, then you can access much more space. So one thing, there are many things that freeways and cars have done. One thing that freeways have done is enable this concept of sprawl. We've heard that word used a couple of times today. It was also in your planning terms booklet for those of you who read through it. We can give a brief definition of sprawl. I can show
Pull it
you
up.
sprawl, yeah.
A pattern of low-density suburban development that is highly dependent upon the automobile as the main form of travel and is considered the source of today's traffic congestion, environmental degradation, and other issues associated with the growth of suburbs since at least World War II.
Okay, so this idea of sprawl is everything is spread out. Just like when you sprawl on the couch and you take up all the space so that no one can sit next to you, it's spreading out. So one thing that the introduction of cars and this idea of the freeway enabled was sprawl. There are several other things that also happened around the same time. This is a photo of an area outside of Chicago called Oak Brook when the freeway was first put in. There's nothing around the freeway, right? Pretty empty. 30 years later, this is what it looked like. So people could access this land so much more easily because of the freeway, and then it developed. So now we have downtown Chicago, a city center, and this area right next to the freeway. Something else that the introduction of the freeways did in the United States in particular is created these areas of separation. There is a really interesting Instagram account called Segregation by Design, and they talk about all of the ways that through planning and through transportation design and things like this, our cities have been more segregated. This would be an interesting final project if anyone is interested in the idea of transportation or segregation. And then also, something that freeways and the change in transportation did is that many small cities that used to be these bustling hubs, these rail line hubs, were then bypassed by the highway. So if we're thinking about an example in Summit County, we had a rail line come in. The initial purpose of this rail line was to be able to connect Park City to an existing transit or train stop in Echo. And this train stopped at Longship, Atkinson, Hoytsville, Colville, Echo, and with the introduction of the highway, those small, once thriving towns are then bypassed. So there are a lot of impacts from transportation options because we know that access is always the answer. If you're no longer forced to stop in these places, perhaps people won't do it anymore. So in short, transportation options and land use are always connected. Access is the answer to everything. And your perspective matters. Okay, what do I mean by perspective? Well, just like when we were thinking about the introduction of freeways in the United States, one perspective might be, I can now access a whole lot more land more easily than I could before. Another perspective might be, communities are being intentionally split or broken up by these freeways. Another perspective might be, my small town that used to be a bustling train stop has now been passed over by the highway. And just like in those examples, planning can be looked at through a variety of different lenses, based on your interests, based on what you want to accomplish. So if you are interested in the history of planning, you can approach it from a variety of different lenses or perspectives. So we have lots of different books. If you're interested, you can borrow them from me. If you're interested in sort of more the history of segregation in the US, this is a good one. If you're interested in more in the impacts on education, this is a really interesting one to look at. Evicted deals with housing and housing affordability. The Death and Life of Great American Cities, if you haven't read it, is an interesting text. She's real feisty. About planning in America. And then two books that I stole from Peter and Pat, Geography of Nowhere and Suburban Nation. Both offer a lens at looking at our current idea of what's a subdivision, what's a suburb, and how does that relate to planning. That was a lot of words. I'd like you to take a moment, turn and talk to the person sitting next to you, and just say, what did you learn? What did you notice? Go ahead. It is very All right, I'm about to turn it over to Pat, who's gonna give us more information about the history of planning in Summit County specifically. But before we do this, can you please revisit your journals and add any notes? What do you know already about planning in Summit County specifically? And what do you want to know about planning in Summit County specifically? Just add your thoughts and then I'll share.
Everything you wanted to know about planning in Summit County, but we're afraid to ask. Everybody good? Finished writing? So Maddie's worked with me long enough, and certainly Peter and AC know this. I can talk forever, but I promised Maddie that. So committed was I to be brief and on point. I took notes. I'll talk to you about planning in Summit County. Summit County was created by the territorial government in 1854, and it was highly successful. We had small, rural communities focusing on ranching and timber and maybe a bit of extractive mining over here on the east side. We had sort of this stepchild out near a box canyon just on the other side of Parley Summit, Park City. They were big into extracting silver, but for years, those communities were small, self-contained, well-functioning communities, connected, as Maddie said, by various means of transportation. There were railroads, there were early roads, maybe not so many bicycles. Everything was going fine until December 21st, 1963. What happened?
Federal loan to develop the Silver King Mining Company into a ski.
Treasure Mountain Ski Area was opened up in 1963, which at the time wasn't really that big of news, right? They had other recreational areas. There were other ski hills in the area. You had Ecker Hill, and you had like a small little lift over in what was called Frog Valley. Skiing wasn't new, so it wasn't that big of a splash. But over the next dozen or so years, it started to make a change on the landscape, certainly on the western side of the county, but it was an early example of how really we may be considered somewhat different in values and cultures from side to side, but it really reflected, sort of that relationship between the East and the West. In 1960, about the same time, the early 1960s, Summit County adopted a subdivision ordinance. Wasn't zoning, just said, if you are going to divide your property, here's the process that you're gonna go through. Again, no zoning didn't exist, it didn't say what or how much or where, it just was sort of a legal process to convey land. That was the first start. And what that gave us are a number of neighborhoods that we have now that predate zoning: Summit Park, Silver Creek, Highland Estates. Over here on the east side, the cabin zones, we call them. That's where they had their origin. In some of these, and particularly like Silver Creek and Highland Estates, for our Highland Estates folks, on those subdivision plats, they actually identified certain uses in certain areas. It wasn't zoning, but it was conveyed through those subdivision plats. We argue about those all the time, still to this day. But that was the situation up until 1977. And in 1977, Summit County, in response to that community up there in that Box Canyon, Park City, who adopted their first zoning ordinance in 1976, they adopted the very first countywide zoning ordinance. And what did it do? It established what uses could go where, in what level of intensity. It had some very, very preliminary sort of building height bulk standards. Very, very, very basic stuff. And it stayed that way until 1985. And I thought that was just wonderful. I was telling Peter and AC, the whole exercise failed as it peeled off the wall. Want to do that? I like to trot this out. This is actually a scanned image of the first zoning map, official zoning map for Summit County. Here, I'll walk it by everybody. So limited were we in our resources in 1977, we had to do this on papyrus. And over the years, the papyrus dried and cracked, and a lot of the information in the template lettering on the papyrus fell off.
They weren't just trying to be fancy?
No, and so like, when you get the first early zoning interpretations that go back to, you know, the, at least probably the Carter administration, we were all arguing over this map. But can you think, this was actually our official zoning map of Summit County for a very long period of time. This was the reason I think we have ghosts that moved off the wall.
We put that together, I can't imagine it was planning department.
But it didn't even have the dates and any properties there.
No, if you see it, we'll leave it out later and you can take a look at it. The dark green areas mostly reflects a 1 house per 40 acres. And then you can kind of see, if you walk up close to us here, you can see Rockport, you can kind of see where Silver Creek is, down in the bottom in Highland Estates over here. I've been a terrible weather person. Silver Creek, Highland Estates, you got your little bit of Pine Brook in here, Summit Park, very primordial like Jeremy Ranch in this area, and then we have our favorite community to the south, Park City, down over here, down here. This is the Camas area in Oakley. Interstate 80 would be coming right through here. This is where we began. In the very basic form of land use control, in planner speak, we talk about a form of zoning that separates different types of uses and maps them. We call it Euclidean zoning. And where that name comes from, it comes from the community Euclid, Ohio, which is a small suburb of Cleveland. Any Clevelanders here?
I'm from Ohio, I serve in Cleveland.
Yeah, so Euclid was the test case in a Supreme Court decision, Euclid versus Amber Realty. In that particular Supreme Court case, it validated for the first time in US history communities' ability to regulate land use through zoning. It wasn't a constitutional taking at that point in time. And from that day forward, we always refer to Euclidean zoning. If you ever hear one of us use that term, please smack us, because we can explain it better than that. But that's where it started. In 1985, a pattern began. In 1985, Eastern Summit County was given its own zoning ordinance. It kind of broke off. They seceded from the rest of the remaining county in their zoning ordinance, and they had their own set of rules and regulations. Still had one planning commission, Still had one council that oversees, but they had their own set of zoning regulations. Trying to stick to my nose.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is this countywide, that's for unincorporated land, so anything in the city?
Very good point, yes, excellent point. Did this, were these zoning regulations applied within the municipalities? No, if they were incorporated municipalities, places like Colville, Hannaford, Oakley, Francis, am I missing any?
Camas.
Park City, Camas, they had their own rules and regulations, so it was only an unincorporated Summit County. And
Did you need building permits and stuff like that prior?
mhm,
So you had to have a building permit, but there was just no zoning or planning?
correct, correct. And again, two separate processes. Zoning, what, how much, and where. Building, are you constructing that, whatever you're building, the house, the barn, the building in a way that's safe to occupy? Two different things. But it wasn't until 1977, and through that period in 1985, sort of was the change. That change for me was significant, because in 1985, Eastern Summit County getting its own zoning ordinance, that for me, historically speaking, was the first example of the county beginning to see itself split. This whole idea that we have a different destiny, a different sense of values, our problems are unique, that began in 1985. And I'm not suggesting that was bad. There were a lot of reasons why the folks over here on the east side wanted that, because the dynamics, the nature of the change in the development into the early 80s with the ski resort was different. We didn't have a ski resort over here on the east side, you know? Things remain the same probably in a lot of ways since 1854. That first change in 85 was further enhanced in 1996 when the state legislature passed a law, state law, allowing counties to have more than one planning district. That's when we created for the first time the Eastern Summit County Planning District and the Snyderville Basin Planning District. Each with their own set of rules, each with their own general plan, each with their own vision. And that's really important for you guys to begin to think about and digest. One county, full of county residents, with two separate visions.
Is that what's on our map? Is that
Here's my aid. Absolutely. So, what you're gonna see over here on this map, this was a zoning map that existed primarily for Eastern Summit County in the early 2000s. Just off to the lower left-hand side is gonna be the Snyderville Basin.
Is that common throughout the West, that a county would have more than one planning commission?
It's not unique to us, but it's certainly not common. And again, keep in mind, what was the reasoning behind that? A very, very strong, passionate sense of self-determination in the areas within those two planning districts. The Snyderville Basin Park City area was often running as a resort, a world-recognized resort. The economy here on the east side, very different. Extractive industries, coal, timber, were all different. Ranching, that was still part of the economy. It was really two different worlds, but the key is it took us in two separate directions. So, I want to talk about the Snyderville Basin in particular. This is rich. I could put you guys to sleep with stories about that, but it's all relative, okay? So, in 1998, we went from that basic form of zoning, the colored map with this only use over here and this other specific use over there. We got residential here, we've got commercial over here, we got institutional uses over there, we'll just figure we'll drive in between them, we'll make it work. That was replaced by a performance-based zoning code. It was called the Matrix.
Whoa.
Yeah, exactly. Almost got hit with that bullet. What the Matrix system was all about was this idea in performance-based zoning. Okay, wrap your heads around this. Under performance-based zoning, the theory is anything could go anywhere provided it offset the problems it's creating. I'm going to say that one more time. Anything should be able to go anywhere so long as it solves the problems and the impacts it's creating.
What about the unintended consequences?
Well, Bill, what we're gonna do is we're gonna step on the accelerator on that and speed up to like 1998, because that's exactly what happened, is the unintended consequences. A great idea, right? See, when I first started working a long time ago, I worked in 2 performance-based zoning communities. One worked pretty good, one worked pretty bad. Breckenridge, Colorado, and in the Flagstaff area in and around Sedona. So, how that performance-based zoning worked is there would be a matrix of criteria that every project would be evaluated and scored typically numerically. If you received a 0, that means you did just the basic minimum to address this issue. If you got a plus score, you were considered going beyond the expectation of meeting that criteria. If you got a negative score, you just, you did a poor job of it. At the end of the day, in that matrix system of performance zoning, you had to have a positive, you had to have a 0 or a positive score. So the unintended consequences is almost like, indulgences. I'm gonna buy my way into heaven. I'm gonna buy my way into heaven by getting points for throwing in, somewhat sarcastic, but 6 more potentilla bushes. I'm gonna buy my way a win by buying a fire truck. I'm gonna buy my way some points in some open space or some other improvements. What ended up happening, and it's common to performance-based zone communities, was, as Bill just said, the unintended consequences. What in theory should have worked didn't and had problems, right? So in 2008, the county went in a whole other direction. They went into the sort of hybrid approach of that sort of fundamental base zoning and going through a specific entitlement process called a specially planned area. And under the concept of a specially planned area, you were zoned at a really super low threshold of development rights. Sometimes 1 to 40, 1 to 160, and above, right? The idea was the county would negotiate to get the desired project and the desired amenities and attributes of the project, and as the applicant or the developer brought more to the table, the development rights increased.
What do you mean development?
Rights to build things, density, units, houses, commercial, townhouses.
So they could buy options.
Well, what they were attempting to do was to trade off the impacts of the commercial or the residential, those impacts, with things that were positive for the community. Best example of this is the canyons. The canyons specially planned area. Canyon specially planned area, very low base density originally under the base, what we call the base zoning map. They went through multiple years in a negotiation process, first with the planning commission and ultimately with the county commission in those days. They went from a handful of residential units, because again, that ill-fated map that fell onto the ground, all that green area, 1 per 40 or 1 per 120, that's where they started with. In order to get the 8 million square feet of resort development in there, it came with housing commitment, it came with open space, it came with a golf course, it came with a commitment for a convention center, an arts component to that. Some of the things haven't been completed yet, but that's how that project was able to be entitled, was through that specially planned area. If you ever hear us talk about a spa, we're not going somewhere to lay down and have black stones put on us. It's that development plan review, site plan review, weighing impacts versus benefits. That's what started in 2008. So think about this for a minute. From very early on, you had this primordial form of base zoning. You went to radically different performance-based zoning. And then for the third time around, you went into this hybrid. You had 3 distinctly different land management systems. How do you think that went? Went great, right? And who thought it went pretty good? Raise your hands. Okay, who thought it probably could have gone better or it didn't work? Raise your hands. Okay, be brave, be brave. Yeah, you're right. And so when things such as land development and investment and real estate, right, when expectations aren't met, what usually happens? Well, what usually happens is litigation and lawsuits, judges and decisions. It's important for you all to know, if you're going to make any sense of what we do, that specifically in the Snyderville Basin, the vast majority of what you see on the ground today has nothing to do with a general plan or a zoning ordinance. It has to do with litigation and the settlements of those litigations and lawsuits. When people come to CAC at the counter or Peter, like, you know, how did that happen? How can we, why can't I change my property? It all stems back in many instances to the complicated history behind it and the nature of the individual judgments that were made at the time to solve the zoning dispute.
Is the Snyderville Basin still zoned at 140 and 120, the density?
Yeah.
So like, so for example, like when I bought my house, the appraisal said that I could only have one house on 40 acres.
Of all of the zoning districts in the Snyderville Basin, the predominant zoning district is rural residential. 1 house per 20 acres, or 1 house per 40 acres if it happens to be on, you know, steeper terrain. So, and Bill will come back in. The other significant thing with that is those 3 completely separate land management systems, coupled with subdivisions that were created in the 1960s before zoning, have created a community that, to the large part, is all non-conforming. We have whole neighborhoods that don't meet the density requirements of the rural residential zone. We have lots that can't come close to meeting the setbacks of the rural residential zone. So you say, Pat, Peter, AC, what have you guys been doing for the last dozen or so years? Well, if you go and take a look at the most recent version of the general plan is say, here's what we need to do. We need to zone our neighborhoods for what they are right now. for starters. We gotta get rid of that nonconformity. The other thing that we need to do is we need to create zoning for what we collectively want to see in the future.
When was that general plan adopted?
Most recent version of that is 2016. And I'm gonna leave that statement for you now, just to think about and consider as you move through, these next several weeks. Think about what we have on the ground now. We have a community that doesn't even meet the zoning that's laid on top of it.
Just to better understand the history, even though it doesn't really matter. It's not like planning as a professional business was brand new in 1998. How did we just kind of gloss over that this is just how it was decided to be?
I guess I don't quite understand your question.
I guess I'm just, how did it happen?
The politics of planning.
But can we go deeper into what those politics look like, or is that beyond the scope
I
of
think
this?
I'm gonna go beyond the scope of my
Okay,
time limit.
that's
I'd be
fine.
happy to talk to you about
Perfect.
that. I think it's important for me to say 1960, 1977, 1985, 96, 1998. These decisions were made by good people who were trying to make the best decision they could at that time with the information available to them. These weren't bad, nefarious folks, right? Like all of us, the future of that crystal ball gets a little bit hazy, a little bit cloudy. They were trying to make the best decisions that they were, that they could. Keep in mind, I think it's fair for me to say, because I'm old and, my tenures, slowly coming to an end, I feel I can say these things. The other influence in the Snyderville Basin, I'd be misleading you by saying the influence of what was going on in Park City really played into the push for this growth during this period of time. Park City had tools that the county didn't have at the time, zoning tools. They had funding resources that the county didn't have. If a project couldn't get approved in Park City, where was the next run? Where were they gonna go? Was there, yeah, maybe it would work in the county. And so that was a significant influence as well. So that has been the case since 2008. Recently, in 2021, there were some changes made to the Basin Development Code or zoning ordinance. It cleaned up some of the language. It created a master planning process to evaluate projects under. The master planning process wasn't a development permit per se, but it established basically those key criteria, those key elements of a plan that we wanted to look at and evaluate whether they were acceptable or not acceptable or needed to be changed with every single development permit application. We, the staff spent a number of years working with the Planning Commission in public meetings, saying if we were going to possibly consider changes, if we were gonna direct some of the growth that we know we're gonna be seeing, where would be the best locations to put that growth? And what came out of that exercise is they said, well, for one thing, we gotta be really careful, right? It's the difference between encouraging growth and managing what's gonna happen anyway. And so what we heard from the community is, well, we would prefer to see it in developed areas, meaning we don't want it to sprawl out into undeveloped land, so preferably in developed areas, or very close to it. We want it where there are already a network of infrastructure, water, sewer, power. We would really like it to be in areas where we can move people in ways other than just a car, those fledgling days of High Valley Transit. And the other part was we would like it where we could put people where they work, employment centers. So where were those areas that we flagged in the general plan? They were Kimball Junction, the lower lower portions of Jeremy and Pine Brook. Again, all existing developed areas, potentially lower Silver Creek, Silver Summit, where I live in that area over there, and then to maybe a smaller, portion, a very small node overwent by Quinn's Junction. Now, in identifying those areas, we didn't zone them for mixed use. What we just simply said is they have the attributes for us to at least consider a project that would work. And the idea being was like, always hanging in the room was the Kimball Junction gorilla, right? How can we find a way to give people a reason not to drive into the junction? To go to the grocery store to Smith, to go to the liquor store, to go, get their services. If we could attempt to make some of those neighborhoods more self-contained at a reasonable level, we just capture the vehicles there and they don't go into the junction. So that's where we were and where we are on the Snyderville Basin side. The goal, zone our neighborhood for what's on the ground and what we want to see. Yeah, that was the objective, Bill.
So, taking your history lesson there, where we've gone from 3 different types of zoning, planning, mechanisms. 2008, we had the, special planning areas, is that what SPA stands for?
Yeah.
The special planning areas introduced. I can't help but think that coincides with the history of what's now known as the canyons, which had previously been 2 or 3 different other resorts that had gone bankrupt, essentially, or belly up. They had to sell the business until it became the canyons around that time, and they created this master plan where they've had some development now, and now it seems like it's pretty self-sustaining. Is that just coincidence, or is there some impact of that change in the zoning process to allow that special planning area?
I think there's a correlation there. There's certainly a
Don't you
relationship there.
think some of the litigation led to the end result of the canyons? Because there was quite a bit of litigation that led up to, during Park West and all those owners in between.
Perhaps. I wouldn't disagree with that to a certain
Road
degree.
too, because now Newport has business at Redstone, and that was empty for
Yep.
15 years.
Yep. The one other thing that I missed in this were when the spas were created, that process, spas were allowed everywhere. The effects of that, the negative effects of that, had the county pull back and say, well, we're not going to allow them everywhere, we're just going to allow them in a special area. One is the town center, and that's Kimball Junction. The other is the resort center, which is the canyons.
How does affordable housing back in 2010 and all that, in 29, it was all like, oh, fee in lieu of building affordable housing, and then it's like, oh, we need more houses. So how does that kind of relate into here when the county was accepting fee in lieu of building the housing?
When we bring our workforce housing, our employee housing folks in to talk, they're gonna give you guys a deep dive on that.
So it drove me crazy, it's like, of course there's a problem.
When I arrived in town in 1994, 1995, was there a need for workforce housing? Man, absolutely, there was. I was a beneficiary of some of those very, very early units. Is it the situation that we find ourselves in today? It was very different times that we have. So when we had, Peter?
I'm gonna just give someone a point to ponder, because I carry this unusual statistic around in my mind. Let's say someone came through the door today and said, I will pay cash to build 200 units of affordable housing. To do that under base zoning in Snyderville Basin, you'd have to acquire a parcel of land 6¼ square miles to meet the existing zoning. That's an illustration of perhaps we don't need affordable housing and we'll never get it, or maybe there's some basic flaws in our current zoning. And I'll leave you guys to decide how we're gonna solve that problem sometime in the near future, but it's an interesting statistic to carry around. 1 unit per 20 acres isn't gonna build 200 units of any housing.
I think, I just want to understand the distinction. So the plan is a document that's approved by by who, and it was created by people, and zoning is an ordinance, which is a law, which is the county council, but the plan, who approves the plan? Is that the council as well, or the?
You mean the general plan or a specific?
Well,
plan?
One of the best questions of the night. We're gonna spend more time at that,
Okay,
in the future, but I'm gonna do my best to quickly answer that. The general plan is the document that expresses the community's vision and expectation for the future. What is important to us? What do we need to preserve? What's that hill we're gonna die on? Where are the opportunities? Where can we be better? How do we manage the threats? And yeah, there are pieces of that, land use and transportation and housing and all of that. But it's that document that I always like to refer to it as our community creed. You know, there are some people that gather on the weekends and they'll express a creed. What is a creed? It's just simply a collective understanding and beliefs in what makes that particular community. A general plan is our creed. That creed is not a regulatory document. It's just our objective, our goal, our target. This is what we want to become. This is where we think the opportunities lie. These are the hills we're going to die on to save. That's why they call it a plan. It's like a battle plan. The Detroit Lions have a plan that's going to take them all the way to the Super Bowl, right? It's aspirational, right? They can't get there on aspiration. Would they have to do something to implement that? How they implement that is the zoning regulations. That's the tool that builds that aspiration onto the ground or prevents it from happening other ways. And so we'll learn about that a little bit more, but if I shift gears real quick to go to the east side, if there's one thing I could just beg you to keep considering is the fact in the Snyderville Basin, so much of what you see on the ground today has nothing to do with that general plan or those zoning regulations. They're a result of litigation. The other thing is, remember, we have all this nonconformity. I'm not the brightest guy in the room here by any stretch of the imagination, but I would think we would all agree that what's on the ground now that we've already built, we should probably have zoning that recognizes that. We don't. Why? Finally, you know, if we are being really good ancestors, we're going to want to be able to begin to think what we see that future looking like and begin to articulate it. We're really good about saying what we don't want, but we don't do a very good job and put forth the creative side of our brain to explain and articulate what we would want, what we want to see, our kids and our grandkids want to see. Think about that and how we get there. And Maddie, I'm really spending a lot of time with those. See what happens to me? Okay, so the east side, the biggest zoning district in Summit County. Okay, so remember, we were talking about 1985, we get our own zoning regulations. 1996, we get our own planning commission. And we start spatially arranging the east side of the county on east side county terms and values. Well, in those early days, the whole development pattern, well, to a large extent, was based on developing residential units and housing. You know, housing's for families and their kids and stuff like that. Outside of what was going on in the municipalities, you know, there wasn't big industry coming in. We didn't have big resorts. It was where we were going to house our people. And so the initial strategy was this concept called the highway corridor. Most of the county here on the east side, at a minimum, was based one unit, one house per 40 acres, 80 acres, 160 acres. That's a pretty low threshold of development rights, right? So how are we able to build these houses for ourselves, our parents, our kids? The idea was, we came up with, is we're gonna have this highway corridor overlay. And what it was a halo district that followed all state and county roads from the center line. Initially, it was 500 feet back from the center line on one side and 500 feet back on the other. And it mirrored, you look at a zoning map on the highways, and it was just this big, long, yellow line over on all the county roads and all the state highways. Within that highway corridor area, you, depending on how much acreage you had on your property in that highway corridor, you could get a unit of development, you could get a house. Peter, what was it, one per?
One per acre, but it's varied, it's been one per half.
Right. Started out one per half, and then they shrunk the highway corridor from 500 feet to 250 feet, and then up the amount of land necessary to build a home. And so what that did, practically speaking, is it built a very linear development pattern of houses. You just drove down the road, driveway. Which I came from a agricultural background. Parents were dairy farmers. One thing that they didn't like to do is to turn a combine around in a field so they didn't hit a house, right? Plowing around houses. It kind of made sense in those early days, We've got cattle, we've got crops, we're not gonna put our houses out there. You're taking away our economic livelihood. We're gonna keep them close to the road. Shorter driveways, don't have to plow them, don't have to run like power lines way out into the middle of a field. That was the development pattern for up until almost 2017 when Peter and AC and I got there. The problem was in 1995 or 1985, a couple houses along the road probably wasn't that big of a problem. But as we filled the corridor in, as we filled in those driveways, as we added to the car volumes going down those roads, you can see the obvious problem with that. So a lot of people were concerned about that. Well, how do we change it? The minute we started talking about changing that, we were into this really complicated discussion of taking away property rights. On one of our very first planning commission meetings, we actually have photographs of Peter and I looking like geese from the tar and the feather being taken out on our head. How are we gonna reconcile that? How we ended up reconciling that was reworking the zoning map to do a couple of things. We took away the highway corridor. In exchange, we did a fairly careful, methodical study of if we were going to upzone properties to replace the rights taken away from removing the highway corridor, what would that look like? So in some instances, 40-acre zoning went to 20-acre zoning, 10-acre zoning, or 5-acre zoning. And we held our breaths, waiting, for the lawsuits to come in. They didn't. But we also did a couple of other things. We made some modifications to our subdivision regulations to make them hopefully a bit more predictable. And we created another process. It's called village overlay. What was part of the conversation during this period of time, 2013, about 2016, 17, is we didn't want to get in a development arms race with the municipalities where the county would approve a lot of development just on the border of the city or the town, whether that was Camas or Oakley or Colville. The overriding thought was that if communities were going to grow, they grow best from the inside out, that organic approach that Maddie was talking about. And so we amended our zoning ordinance to require, if you think like we had to mandate it of ourselves, of requiring better communications between the county and the city when development was occurring kind of on their fringes. The other thing that we did was that we recognized that there were a number of real historic places on the east side that weren't incorporated. Places like Wanship, Echo, and Marion, and Upton, and, you know, Woodland. They've been places for over 150 years, right? They probably needed a sense of their own, you know, future. And so we created what was called a village overlay that allowed property owners to come together under one joint application, first do a land plan that they would initiate and develop with the help of the staff. That land plan would then become part of the general plan, and as part of the general plan, ultimately, the zoning ordinance would be amended to have the appropriate zoning to implement that plan. We've only had one come in since that time. You've probably, if you're reading the park record or listening to KPCW, you've heard about the Cedar Crest Village overlay. It's 1,100 acres surrounding the historic village of Hoytsville, which is halfway between Colville and Wanship. And so we're deep into that land planning, and I would anticipate probably the Eastside Planning Commission beginning to take that project up in earnest in evaluating their recommendation to the council here by the end of the year. But two different sides. The good news is, from our perspective, as much as there is going on, what we're finding out is there are more common issues than there are separate issues. That for us gives us a whole lot of hope, because there's the basis for our conversation. What Maddie and our communications folks have been doing over the course of this past year has been like a complete dive into the deep end of the pool of having a conversation, get this, county-wide. It's not a discussion with Snyderville Basin folks about Snyderville. It's not a conversation with the Eastside folks about what they want to see happen over here. It's a discussion about the future and the destiny of Summit County, because whether we like it or not, we're all becoming more part of a web and affecting each other. And that's a powerful, like, you know, when you go back to 1985 when we did this split, we're coming back together again.
So you see the two of them, you see the two planning commissions being merged? I mean, why
You asking old fart Pat that question? Because if you were,
young fart Pat.
if you were, here would be my hope. We were filming this. Council, you're looking good, been lifting weights. I think it's beyond reasonable. I think it's necessary to have one county general plan. Will we always have separate kind of unique neighborhoods or areas? Absolutely. That's probably one of the things that just makes it so good to live here. We got those unique different places, right? We don't want to change that. But it would be great if we could articulate that common destiny, that common vision. And again, what are those things that are so important that we just do not want to change? It's the hill we're going to die on. Where are those opportunities for us to be better? How do we better connect with each other? How do we build a better economy where the East Side is not a ward to Park City or the Snyderville Basin or to Ogden or to Salt Lake? Can we create those opportunities? Can we think about creating places to live that include the young, those first starting out, the elderly? You know, what do we do? Our biggest export here in Summit County? It's our kids. You know, we educate them, we pay to get them educated, and what do? We oftentimes just send them off because they can't come back. Can we create a better place? That's what this visioning is all about. And when that's done here, begins to wrap up here by the end of the year, Maddie and Bridget are gonna come in with these big wheelbarrows full of findings. They're gonna put it on like the council dais and begin to explain what the community is actually thinking. And at that point, I think the real magic is gonna happen or not happen is, okay, so what does that mean? Now that we have this mind dump, what are we gonna do with it? Are we gonna change, are we gonna tweak the two general plans? Are we gonna substantially overhaul the two general plans? Or are we gonna roll up our sleeves and create a common unified vision?
So who commissioned that visioning project that's going on? Who?
County Council.
County Council.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, our Park City friends in the room here, Park City's going through the same sort of steps and processes themselves. You know, there's opportunities here to begin to talk to one another. So the zoning history, as bizarre as it is, there's literally light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not one of Maddie's trains. There's a lot of hope here. You know, there's the old saying, sit down. How many planners are there in Park City, Summit County, Eastern Summit County area? Well, if you total us all up, there's probably about 20 of us that get paid. The reality is there's like 46,000 of us, and I got 21 in the room here today. Welcome to the club. That's the background. That's the forensic examiner's history of Summit County. Remember like Quincy Medical Examiner? All those old development agreements and lawsuits, we spend so much time in our office going through those legal documents. You're like, God, how did that get stuck in there? Like, boy, that's unusual. But it all goes back to, particularly on the west side, 3 radically different approaches to problem solving that didn't work as well as people hoped. If you got questions later on, just like you're just burning, what about that? Come and talk to us. We'll be happy to tell you what we know.
Hey, Pat. Hey, turn to tell the person sitting next to you, what did you learn from Pat's explanation of history and planning and
This is mine. I decided I didn't know everything.
Do you want to pass out your box?
Some what? Sure.
Alright, wrap up your conversation, please.
We're not gonna put
Okay, come back together, please. We're gonna end this evening looking at an activity that's going to bridge. We started with this really general history of planning and what is planning. Then we looked at more specifically what is the history of planning in Summit County. And now we're gonna do an activity that's gonna bring both of these together. And I want you to think, what is your experience with planning in Summit County? So, in just a moment, I'll show you an example of what this looks like, but first I'm gonna walk you through the directions. So, when we start, you write down on your sheet of paper that you just got, the place where you live, where you work, or where you spend the majority of your time. You'll write down the places that you need to go, and you'll also write places that you want to go. I want you to identify how you get to each of these locations. Do you walk? Do you bike? Do you drive? Do you take the bus? How do you get there? Also consider the distance between each location and the time it takes to get to each of these locations. So here's an example of how this could look. So this person has identified their home and their work. They said that they bike during the summer, drive during the winter. They can walk to a park, so presumably this distance is shorter, that distance is longer. They also go to the grocery store and their kids' school. Okay, let's see another example of what this could look like. A more graphic version. I don't think that this is indicating that they fell down on the street. I think that's walking. So their house, they might take the bus to get to school. Maybe they can walk to the dog park, and then they drive into the mountains. Okay? Another example showing home, work, other activities, like maybe you need to walk 5 minutes from the bus stop to get to work, and you can walk 15 minutes to complete the rest of your errands. If you start at your home, you can drive or take the bus to the library. You start at your home, you can walk or bike to your friend's house. And last example, thinking about all the things that you like to do. So this person indicates that they would drive from their home to their work in downtown. Then from the work in downtown, they can walk to a bookstore, the coffee shop, the grocery store, and the dentist. On their way home, they can stop at their pottery class and then continue driving home. Maybe they have to drive to get to the gym, but they can walk to the second gym. I don't have more than one gym, so, pretty fancy example there. So this is what these could look like. Now, the blocks that you have, if you're the type of person who likes to plan out before you start writing things down, utilize the blocks, place them on your paper, and think, okay, if that's my house, the approximate distance to the park, it's about that, but it's about double the distance to get to my work. So start planning out spatially. If you don't want to use the blocks, you don't have to. You can go right in with your pencil or the marker. Okay? So I'll go back to your directions page. So start with writing down where you want to go, where you need to go, then how do you get there? Go ahead.
Map and topography, cash box.
That I work out of my house, so that's included in our.
Yes, it might be anywhere. Good question.
Thank you so much. I like the little green ones.
Mistakes where it's kind of crawl up.
Seems like some people are starting to consider those errands or those activities that are not every day, but they do come up every once in a while. Like, oh yeah, I do actually have to get to the airport. Oh, I actually do have to go to Costco sometimes.
You don't have to.
That's why there's a membership.
You choose to read. Also, we choose to go to the parking lot, it doesn't feel fun.
Martina, do you need 40 colors?
I have one color.
Really?
Plain
Nice.
Jane.
Nice.
I have to drive everywhere because
Well, I was just asking because of your professional background for the legend.
yeah, it looks so good.
When you're thinking about a distance, you can be specific in number of miles, or you can just use relative length of arrows. You can use time more, if that's what matters to you. If you're still working on it, you can continue, but if you're starting to wrap up, the next thing you're gonna do is talk to the person sitting next to you or a couple of people sitting around you, and I want you to consider looking at your realm of activity that you just created and looking at your partner's realm of activity that he or she created. Is there anything that you could add or subtract that would make people's lives easier or more convenient? Thinking about how you get places and where you want to go. Is there anything you could add or subtract to make things easier or your life more convenient?
My grocery, I deliver vendors and
Yeah, so around the gym. Yeah, so I go to the gym.
You go
Yeah.
home as well,
Or access.
then is there a fire? My whole life, during my time in my
I'm really curious, like, as a But there are also also steps that we can take to determine if it's a Yeah, like literally, like I'm out there with my children, like, and they're in the rut right now. Rich says it's in his 20s, whatever, how many years he's been there. It is the first time he's genuinely out for him. Yeah, we went out there and we just pissed him off. And the thing looked at him and he's like, it was about to run through my wall.
That's not even Emerald Legacy's top of the range silverware. That's just about it.
Now, I just want you to pause and think for a moment how different your lives, your realm of activity space would be, how different they would be if you weren't able to drive. A lot of the things that I'm seeing on people's realm of activities are pretty reliant on cars. So if you weren't able to drive, how different would that have to be? When we plan, we have to plan for not only all of us in the room, but we have to plan for everybody. So we have to keep that in mind as we're thinking about what the built environment looks like and how it functions. We'll come back to these activities, so I'm going to encourage you can fold them up and keep them inside your journal. It'll be helpful to be able to reference back to them. To wrap up, I'd like you to look in your journal and we're going to do something called a 3-2-1 summary. And so what this is you're going to write down 3 things you learned tonight, 2 things that you found interesting, and 1 question that you still have. This is the same activity you'll be doing when you observe the Planning Commission and County Council meetings. So here is a practice for us. 3 things you learned, 2 things you found interesting, 1 question you still have.
what is the accordion known as? The instrument of love. That's in the scriptures.
I would have to write that one down.
Speaking of accordions, Euclid, Ohio is the home of the National Cleveland Polka Style Museum.
There's a connection, there's always that connection.
So Maddie, I'll change my answer for my music. Birds and accordions,
Really common.
not
It's really
harps.
hard to play. Sorry.
We're coming up on the end of time, so I'm just gonna pop up on the screen. This is the assignment for next class. This is all in your syllabus and it's all on the website as well, but I just wanted to pop it up on the screen. If you wanted to see it, there's some readings to do. We're asking you to review the syllabus, like I talked about at the beginning of class. Please bring any questions you might have on the final project to class next time. There's an optional item up there to find a planning issue in local or regional news and bring that article with you. We'll have a little bit of time at the beginning of next class to be able to share. And then the last thing is that there is a feedback survey. I will also email you the link to this. If you could please complete this by tomorrow at 8, that would be really helpful. It just helps with my future planning to understand what's working, what's not working, things like that. And I will put the journal back up there in case you need to see it. And if you need to ask any questions, we have our fearless leaders here in the back. And if you could take your blocks back with you, that would be great too. Yeah.
Because it's really hard for me to learn names.
Yeah, it's impossible, but.
To get like the little triangle things, I can pay for them if no one else. I just like to.
No cards?
No, well, this just so that,
Yeah.
like, so I look across the room, but I don't
Yeah.
say that lady. or
Yeah, I would like
The
that.
lady who works at the National Ability Center, so I'm gonna remember them, but I'm not gonna remember your name. I say, and otherwise, it'll be the last week and I'll still be saying.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I did that last class. That's so silly, but yes, you can do that. And we'll have little triangles. I'll bring some next time.
It's not silly.
Okay, thank you so much.
The other question I will ask you, and forgive me if they're on like the
Thank you. See you next time.
Nice to see you next time.
Let's stop this thing.
Right.
Oh no! I'm gonna know everything you said.
Oh, well,
Thank you. See you next time.
Yep, thank you, guys.